1, 2. Rama, muzikën janë në rihapjen e mas pari Record Store të Tullës dhe ky është aktiviteti i parë që ta bëjmë që quhet një seri e re e programit, njëri prej programeve të Tulla që do të ketë, quhet MUZEU I DEGJIMIT, ku çdo disa muaj do ta marrim nga një album I cili është ikonik apo që ka pas ndikim shumë të madh në muzikë apo nganjëherë edhe në jetën tonë se muzika është nganjëherë shumë e lidhur me neve, me emocionet të ndryshme dhe do të kemi të ftuar profesionist, producent, muzikant, që do të flasin në lidhje me albumin, me mënyrën e prodhimit të muzikës dhe mandej do ta dëgjojmë atë album në një cilësi shumë të mirë, cilën ndoshta edhe nuk e kemi mundësinë e pasur shprimin dëgju, ku do të jetë në format të vinilit dhe në bashkëpunim me Sound Gallery dhe TULLA RECORD STORE do ta sjellim në një sistem të audiosh shumë cilësor, ku do të kemi mundësinë me pas tamam me përjetu muzikën siç ka qenë ndoshta përpara dhe qëllimi I këtij programi është që të luftohet devalvimi apo që po vjen, domethënë muzika e cila kohën e fundit ka filluar me rëndësia. Jam shumë I lumtur që sonte kemi një njeri shumë të rëndësishëm dhe shumë special, z.Joe, I cili është një producent muzikor, shumë I suksesshëm dhe një shkrimtar amerikan I cili ka punuar me grupe shumë të mëdha botërore, duke filluar që nga Pink Floyd, R.E.M. dhe shumë bende tjera, ku duhet me cek edhe një projekt shumë interesant cilin e ka pasur fundi është Saz-iso, grupi Saz-iso, dhe albumi cilin e kemi edhe këtu të Record Store, por që do ta flasim në një prej aktiviteteve tjera. Dhe Joe do t'ju flas më shumë për eksperiencën e tij me grupin Pink Floyd në fillimet e tyre. Për më shumë ju prezantoj Joe Boy.
I'm very pleased to be at the first event of this kind in Tulla. I've been to a few in London and New York. It's a very nice thing to go from music being on your phone, very disposable, into a kind of ritual. Taking the vinyl out of the sleeve, putting it on the turntable, sitting down, listening. They have a lot of these events now in London, in Oslo, in Amsterdam, in New York, San Francisco. They call it close listening. And people really do listen. So if someone comes in late, what happens in London is they go, so you can do that.
Next time we're going to close the door.
Okay. I know everybody in Albania knows Pink Floyd, but I'm not sure everybody knows this Pink Floyd. Have you seen this record cover before? Yeah. And have you heard the name Syd Barrett?
Yes.
Yeah. For many people, Pink Floyd means Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall, you know, the famous big selling records. For me, because I was there, I worked with them at the beginning, Pink Floyd always means Syd Barrett, who is the one in the middle. And I think it's one of the saddest stories I have experienced in music. This flowering of Syd Barrett and the first recordings of Pink Floyd, and then his collapse. And I was there on one occasion after this record came out, where Dave Gilmour, who was a friend of Sid's and a friend of the group, came onto the stage with his guitar and stood behind Sid because the group was worried that Sid wouldn't play, because sometimes he would just stand there with his arms at his side. And they were worried that if that happened, you know, the gig would collapse and nothing would, you know, it would be a disaster. So they had Gilmour as a kind of substitute, warming up behind him. And eventually, that became the group. When Sid couldn't play anymore, Dave Gilmour stepped in as a replacement and really did a fantastic thing and changed the group and created so many wonderful songs, and he and Roger Waters made this fantastic, powerful thing. But the beginning was quite different. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the period leading up to making this record, and then we're going to listen to the record. This period, for me, was one of the greatest times in London ever. From August 1966 to August 1967. It was an incredible time as so much was changing all at once. People were starting to dress differently. People were starting to take different drugs. People were starting to listen to different music. There was a kind of crazy feeling in the streets of London. And I always believed that it never would have been so wonderful if it hadn't been for Sid and Pink Floyd, because they were the soundtrack to this year, these 12 months from August to August, 66 to 67. And it began with an organization called the London Free School, which was a kind of underground, left-wing idea to help poor people in a poor section of London, to help them fight with the bureaucracy, to fight with the police, to educate themselves. It was a very idealistic idea. And it needed to raise money. And so somebody suggested that there was a group that was looking for publicity, and they were good. They were from Cambridge, they just came to London, and they would play for free, and we could raise money for this organization. And so we rented, I was involved with this London Free School, and we rented a hall next to a church in Notting Hill Gate. And Pink Floyd, it was one of their very first performances. They came and played at this church hall. And I should say something about the name, because up until a few months before, they were called the Tea Set, which was kind of a little joke with words about tea was a way of saying marijuana. And they decided they didn't like this name. And Syd Barrett had an LP by an old blues singer called Blind Boy Fuller, an American blues singer. And on the liner notes were very scholarly academic notes inside the package of the LP. It talked about other blues singers from the same part of South Carolina that this singer was from. And the two blues singers that were mentioned in these notes were Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. And Sid just looked down and he said, okay, that's our name, Pink Floyd. So that's how the name changed just before this concert. And the concert was amazing. They had a kind of light show, and the music they played was unlike anything else that was around. It was in the spirit of the time, but it was really original and really new. And before we listen to this, I'm going to play a track that I produced with them for a film soundtrack, which I think is the closest that any recording comes to what Pink Floyd sounded like in person. Because on records, they had to stay within 3 or 4 minutes for each track. But live, songs used to go on for 10 or 15 minutes. And this song was one of their most famous, one of the most popular songs when they played for the free school, and then later on for the club that I started with my friend who ran the free school, called UFO, the UFO Club. And there's a nice story behind this track. When I first heard them, I was still working for a record company called Elektra, and I was trying to get them to maybe sign a contract with Elektra. And I gave the manager some records which the label had recently released to show him what a cool, hip American label we were, you know. We just opened an office in London. And the manager took the records home and listened to them. And he really loved them. And he loved one in particular. And the first track on this record really impressed him. And he went to a rehearsal of Pink Floyd, and he said to Sid, "You've got to hear this record. It's really fantastic." And we're just going to play a little bit, just the first 30 seconds of My Little Red Book. It's a group called Love, who are from Los Angeles, and he loved this track. So the manager sat down in this rehearsal room with Sid, and he said, "There's this fantastic track, the first track on this record. It's called My Little Red Book." And he couldn't sing any better than I can. And he said, but he did insist, he said to Sid, he goes, "I just got out of my and about as good as that. And Sid looked at him and he said, "Just a second." And he went and got his guitar and he said, "Do that again." And so the manager went, da 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 da. And Sid started playing what he thought the manager had sung from this track on his guitar. And he went home that night and he wrote the song that then became their signature song in this period of 1966 to 67 called Interstellar Overdrive. And you'll hear the same riff, slightly distorted. have to imagine a room full of people waving their arms, dancing crazily in the colored lights. That was...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because
I mean, you cannot imagine now to have like a 16-minute song now in this, last years. But at that time, also Fela Kuti was doing this long songs, like 20 or 30 minutes one song.
yeah,
And he had a problem because his manager, he said the biggest problem was when they asked for those songs to play on the radio,
yeah,
they told him we can play only 2 minutes. So which part do you want to play of 30 minutes in the song? So I think also this is like a classical music song. They are very long. They have a start and a build up. So it was that role I think that they played at that time. Maybe I don't know. At least Fela said.
yeah.
Well, there was also a lot of avant-garde jazz at the time, which was, doing very long, very abstract improvisations. And Syd Barrett was very affected by a group called AMM, which was a kind of mixture of jazz and classical improvisers, which was even more crazy than that track. They used to have a radio on stage and they would tune in some station, whatever they could find on the radio, and they would play with whatever music was coming over the radio. And Syd loved that, and so he was trying to, this was one of the tragedies of Syd, was that he really felt restricted by commercial music business. And the other track we're going to hear before we, don't worry, it's not so long, before we hear the record is the single that I produced with them, because basically they created a lot of attention. People loved them, and people were coming down to the UFO Club every Friday night to hear them. And record companies, I brought record companies down to listen to them, and then they had a new agent who said, no, let's not sign a contract now. I'll give you the money, you make a single, and then we'll take the finished record to the record company and we'll get a much better deal when we show them a finished record. And so I went in the studio with them. We made this just for a film soundtrack that the guy wanted. He'd heard this at the club, this long improvisation, and he wanted it for the film. And in fact, that was one of the ways that they first developed the style, was they used to rehearse at an art college in London. And they had a friend who, his type of visual art involved refracting light through glass, colored glass. And he would take different kinds of glass and shine them onto the negative, I think, or somehow make this abstract moving images onto a film and then project the film, and that was his piece, his art piece. And they really enjoyed playing while he was projecting his lights onto the wall. And then eventually, when he had his art opening at the school, they played and they improvised based on what they were seeing, and they loved doing that. And so that's all part of what they were developing as a sound. So when we went in the studio, we had exactly the problem you described. We had to have a 3-minute single. And the song that we chose, when they did it at UFO, they did it like this. They did a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus, and then 10 minutes of improvisation, and then a verse and a chorus. And so we had to compress the improvisation into 30 seconds, so the whole thing would be. So you can see whether we're successful or not. We got a little bit of that flavor in the middle of this track. And the song is, we chose the song, it's a really good melody, and it's a great Yeah, everybody should sit down. It's going to be a long LP to listen to. The song is called Arnold Lane, and it was a hit, but it wasn't as big a hit as it should have been because the BBC banned it. And the reason they banned it is because the song Sid wrote out of his own experience. You know, he would see something or have an idea, just something that happened to him. And when he was growing up in Cambridge, his father died of a heart attack, and his mother had to pay to keep the house by taking in students to live in the house. When the older children moved out, she moved in students paying rent. And she found that the male students were very sloppy and smelly, and they came home late at night and they made noise. And so she decided, no, I'm only going to rent to girls. So it was only girls. And when Sid was growing up, he would always see in the backyard underwear, girls' underwear, drying on the line. And sometimes the girls would complain, wait a minute, I hung up 10 pairs of knickers, but there's only 8 now. And then there was a report in the paper about some guy was arrested for stealing girls' underwear. And so it's a song about this guy, this imaginary guy who steals girls' underwear. And he's saying, you know, it's a bit sad, isn't it? You know, that's your romantic life, is stealing underwear. That's the theme of the song, in case you don't get it from the lyric. Anyway, it's called Arnold Lane, and this was the track that we did together.
Arnold Lane had a strange hobby, collecting clothes, moonshine, washing lines. They suit him fine.
They played that record to EMI Records, and they said, okay, we'll give you £5,000. And I said, great, where do we sign? And one of the attractions of the EMI Records was that it was the Beatles label. And so they ended up making their first LP right after we released this record. They went into the studio at EMI, at Abbey Road, the famous Abbey Road. And this whole record that you're going to hear now was recorded in one studio along a corridor, and the next room was where Sgt. Pepper was being made. And, you know, the Beatles used to come in and listen, whoa, what are you guys up to? And then they would, come on, listen to what we're doing. And so Beatles were making, you know, Strawberry Fields and A Day in the Life, as Pink Floyd was making this. And I think, I don't know, but they say that they were mutually inspiring, you know, that some of what Pink Floyd was doing, which was a bit weird, inspired some of the more extreme things that happened with Sgt. Pepper. And the same thing happened with Pink Floyd. Listening to what the Beatles were doing must have been incredibly inspiring. And for those of you who are musicians or work in recording studios, you may know this already, but just in case you don't, what you just heard, Arnold Lane, and the whole LP, which you're going to hear now, was made on 4-track analog tape. And what that means is that when we always recorded the rhythm sections live, the basic track, usually sometimes the vocal, the rhythm guitar, the bass, the drums, all live. And the guitar, bass, and drums, the whole drum kit, all mixed onto one track, mono. So then you had 3 tracks left for vocals, for any other overdubs you might want. And I had a great engineer working on Arnold Lane, and they obviously had great engineers in Abbey Road, and the sound that they get, you know, today it's considered normal. You have a digital Pro Tools, and you have unlimited number of tracks to put. One microphone for the snare drum, one microphone for the bass drum, 16 overdubs of different vocals, choose the best one, you know, that kind of thing. It wasn't like that. You had everything. When you did the vocal, there was only 1 track left. And so if you did it and you weren't sure, is this the best we can do? You had to decide, because the only choice was to erase it. And you better do it better the next time, because you've already erased the good one you just did. And so it brings everything into a moment of immediacy where you really have to deliver. It's not like, oh yeah, let's try another take, sure, we have plenty of time. It's very intense process, working that way. Anyway, I was very disappointed that EMI said, no, we're going to use our engineers, our producers. You know, thank you very much, Joe. Nice job with Arnold Lane. And I was hoping, in a way, secretly, in the kind of bad part of my character, that the LP that they made would be bad and would be unsuccessful. But it wasn't. It's actually very good. And the guy who produced it for EMI did a really good job. And they have these great songs. And it's Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett's Pink Floyd. And sadly, by the time they went into the studio for the second record, Syd was gone. He just couldn't handle it and he kind of slightly lost his mind. And I think if you listen to these melodies and his singing and his guitar playing on this record, you can still, even as far afterwards as Dark Side of the Moon, you can hear the influence. You know, there's a kind of feeling about the melodies, about the harmonies, and certainly, you know, Roger, I think on that last track we heard, the bass holds everything together. Roger was such a great bass player, and I think he is the continuity between Syd and Dave Gilmour. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Sit comfortably. It's not so long. It's about 40 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Joe.